Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Fourth and Florida. On this episode, we're going to talk about the different offenses in the state of Florida for the Power Four teams and explore who we think is going to be the best offense and who we think might be the best QB in the state of Florida. We're going to start it off by going to Jesse from the Plant the Spear podcast. Jesse, go ahead and tell us about FSU.
Well, Daniel, I appreciate you guys, getting together and doing this. It's going to be fun. We're going to throw a few jabs at each other. It's Florida, so you got to have a little bit of, man, you got to have a little bit of thick skin to be on this show. So it's going to be fun. I know you guys are going to enjoy it. But, talking about Florida State this year, it's definitely a new conversation. I mean, we had a lot of returning production last year. You really could just copy and paste over to that 2023 season. And now it's really a fresh start for us. But I do think when you look at Florida State on paper, technically they're more talented this year. They just don't have the production that you've seen in the past. Obviously, to start with, we bring in DJU at quarterback after losing Jordan Travis to the NFL. And I mean, Jordan really, as a veteran quarterback, was one of the guys that is the cornerstone of putting this program, kind of getting us out of that dumpster fire stage that we were in there for a little bit and putting us back on the map. So he's gone, though, now. So you got to replace him. But the thing I like about DJU, and look, I'll be honest, man, you either love them or you hate them, or you believe in them or you don't. There's really no in between. I think we got a guy who can be good for Florida State and do what we need him to do. But there's a lot of people that think we just have damaged goods and that he's going to fail here like people think that he failed other places. And I have some certain thoughts on that too. But I think when you look at DJU, you bring in a guy that has 40 Power 5 starts. He's 30-10 as a starter. He has that experience. And to look back at his time at Clemson real quick, there was a lot of comments about that offense as they progressed later in the years where, they started changing offensive coordinators. They gave the keys to Kay Klubnik. The offense really didn't get any better. They kind of called that a high school offense, a little bit stale and basic. DJU actually criticized that offense on the way out the door, and that led to the firing of an offensive coordinator there in Brandon Streeter. So, I don't know how much of it was DJ and how much of it wasn't. I mean, he went out west to Oregon State. Obviously, he had a better season, not a prolific season, but a better season. And now he's at Florida State, which is, man, the transfer portal is absolutely nuts because this is a guy that came into Doak and beat us in 2022. And now coming into 2024, he's going to be playing Clemson as the quarterback for Florida State. So wild times in college football. But I think DJU can be a guy that can win games for Florida State. And, we actually are going through our quarterback preview right now on the channel. And when you look at DJU, this is what I told people. DJU, if you're asking, can he win Florida State a national championship? You're asking the wrong question. It's can he help Florida State win a national championship? And when you look back to last year, look at the national championship winning quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. Dog doo-doo at quarterback, basically. And then you look at the Heisman winner, Jaden Daniels, put up 5,000 yards and 50 total touchdowns, and they finished third in the SEC West. So it's not so much about the talent at quarterback. And obviously, you guys know that makes a big difference. It's a lot about the team around them. And I feel like this year, Florida State's offense is not so reliant on that one guy like it was Jordan Travis last year. You bring in Malik Benson at wide receiver from Alabama, was the number one JUCO coming out when he went into Alabama. So you got him. You have a couple of other experienced guys with Kentron Portier, Darian Williamson, that's been battling injury their whole career. Then you have five-star Hakeem Williams, who showed a couple flashes last year, but just has to put it together consistently. But he's trimmed down. He looks a lot more athletic this year, so we're excited about that. But
So
I really
hold
think
on. What you're saying is he's War Chant approved.
basically, yeah,
Okay, gotcha.
I didn't want to use his body looks nice. It looks better, but he looks like he's been in the gym a little bit more.
All right.
So we're excited about him, and I really think when you look at this offense, actually the focus should not be on DJU. And I know he is going to be the cog in the wheel that makes the machine move, but it's the running game that we're excited about. Mike Norvell seems to think this is the best offensive line that he's had during his time in Tallahassee. We have a pretty deep and diverse stable of running backs with Lawrence Toafili, a guy that was a Wildcat quarterback for us in the ACC championship game. You bring in Roydell Williams from Alabama, kind of a power back. And then you also have Jalen Lucas coming in from Indiana, who's he's only like, I think 5'9", 175. So he could probably fit in the pocket of an offensive lineman. But man, in space, the guy will leave your ankles laying where they're at. And so we have a lot of skill sets, man. I'm excited about the offense this year. But I think really when you look at FSU's offense, the potential is there. It's just it looks good on paper, but will it look good on the field? I think that's our biggest question. Will these receivers step up? Will they be consistent? Is that offensive line truly going to be as good as we think they are going to be? And that's the question that remains to be seen. But overall, I think that it's going to be a good year on the offense. And, maybe not so much scoring-wise what it has been the past 2 years. But, I mean, Mike Norvell, he has a great history of offensive play calling, scoring. He's put together a top 20 offense the last 2 years at FSU. So I think it'll still be top 25-ish in scoring offense.
Now,
Yeah, Mike,
question I have for you. Question I have for you. You're talking about the wills, and I know you talked about the focus shouldn't be on DJU. Now, he was part of killing the Pac-12. Is this FSU's way of trying to kill the ACC and get out like they've been trying to do? Is this some sort of weird power play?
I hope so. I mean, at the end of the day, man, hopefully this will be his best season in his career, and it'll be our last season in the ACC. That sure would be nice. I think that's going to take a little bit to sort out. So maybe not. I don't think the ACC quite goes the way of the dodo like the Pac-12. But yeah, man, I mean, it's possible. I think he maybe saw the writing on the wall along with Oregon State's coach and was like, uh-oh, man, I'm out of here. He's not trying to play in the Mountain West as last year in college football.
Well, yeah, pretty much that entire Oregon State team left after their quote unquote demotion, right? So I don't think it's necessarily a reflection on him and his ability when it comes to that, right? But at the end of the day, Mike Norvell, we saw a lot of Mike Norvell in the AAC back in the day. And, he is an innovative coach. I mean, one thing he always had was he was always prepared. We actually have a former player that played against his Memphis teams on our show. And he always had something sneaky, a trick play or whatever. So from an offensive minded standpoint, he's a good coach. He's a good offensive mind. Didn't do well against UCF, never beat UCF, but, we aren't talking about that. Offensively, talking a little bit about UCF, UCF's interesting because the last 2 years we had JRP, John Rice Plumlee, as our quarterback. He was a quarterback for basically 3 games, then went to wide receiver, did well as a wide receiver, and then became our quarterback. And for him, he stood about 6 foot. He was about 214, 20 pounds, somewhere around that. So about the size of a running back, and he played that way. So he was injured for 3 games last year. And when he came back, he was kind of hobbled. So we're in a transition year. So for us, it's same offense, different players, but an upgraded roster. So KJ Jefferson will be leading the team this year, which is going to be the key for us. And he's more of a stand in the pocket kind of passer, but can climb the ladder and then get mobile if he needs to. He will run an option type of offense, which is what RPO type of offense, which is what Gus Malzahn likes. He stands 6'4". He's listed at 240. He might be a little bit heavier than that, but he's been getting back in shape. And looks a lot better. So not quite War Chant approved, but in much better shape than he started in camp. And, what will be different for UCF? We have a very good stable of running backs. We've got RJ Harvey, who comes back this year. He was number 3 in the Big 12, in a Big 12 that had Ollie Gordon in it, the number 1 rushing running back in the country last year, in a league that was really, really rush heavy, which is not what you usually see in the Big 12. It surprised a lot of us because people like Oklahoma State typically are going to be, spreading you out and passing the ball around the yard. Texas Tech the same way. Both of those teams ran the ball heavily. We were the number 2 offense actually last year with a hobbled JRP and playing a backup quarterback. And that was Oklahoma was the only one that was in front of us by yardage. We were 3rd. It was us, Oklahoma, and Texas. But our biggest problem last year was the points per game. We could not finish in the red zone. So what I'm looking for and what I believe we're going to be able to do a little bit better this year by having a quarterback that is a little bit more mobile, but is still looking downfield and not tucking and running quickly, is those passing yards to increase, especially when it comes to the middle of the field or short yardage situations in the around 20 to in between the 20 and 30 yard line. The other thing, from a running back perspective, like I said, we've got RJ Harvey. He's a 1,400 yard back last year in the Big 12. We've got another 1,400 yard back behind him in Penny Boone. And then we've got the backup running back who was an 800 yard running back from Cincinnati last year, Miles Montgomery, that's behind him. So you'll see a heavy dose of inside zone. You'll see a lot of A-gap type running style. So it's going to be more hard-nosed style football. But at the same time, I expect we have a pass-catching tight end that started as a freshman last year, was a 4-star, got some playing time, and he's expected to have a breakout year. So between our tight end position, the quarterback position, the running back position, and we've got Xavier Townsend, who was also injured in the slot last year. I expect us to be able to take advantage of the short and middle part of the field more than we did last year. Last year it was either run or throw, throw it deep, right? It's a go route. Yeah. And we had 2 receivers. Javad Baker leaves us this year. He went to the NFL, went in the 3rd round. But we have Kobe Hudson that's coming back, and we brought in a lot of talent to partner with him. So Kobe will be the number 1 receiver this year. He was actually leading Javad Baker most of last season until the very end, where Javad kind of caught up with him. He led in touchdowns. So I expect this offense this year to be a lot more high powered, but a lot more dynamic, and not run, rely on the run game as much. One other thing I'll say is we do get Johnny Richardson back, who was our 3rd running back last year, was also dynamic. So between him and Xavier Townsend, I think they're going to use Johnny Richardson more in the tunnel screens and the jet sweeps and those types of things, which we were missing last year in our offense. So between the running back, having someone like that who's dynamic, someone in the middle of the field, having a good pass blocking tight end, and 3 out of our 5 starters last year on the offensive line, and back, and 5 guys who've been in the program, which we haven't had in a while. I think it spells a lot of success, and hopefully we don't have the same situation we had last year, which is starting 4 different centers in 1 year. So as long as we can, keep the injury bug at bay, I think we'll be good. And I think we have a lot more depth and star power than we had in last year's offense.
Yeah. It's funny when you talk about, you got a quarterback who's 6'4", 250, and DJ's listed at 6'4", 252 on the roster. And like Miami fans were like, oh man, you got a defensive end playing quarterback. And I'm like, you realize the last time he played you guys, he put up over 300 all-purpose yards and a 30-point beatdown. So like, yeah, he might be big, but you may not want to get in front of him because he ran all over your defense. And for what it's worth, I will say that we did invite Miami to this cookout, but they're still rewinding their championship highlights on VHS tape. So we're just kind of waiting for them to get that sorted out. But no, man, I think it's funny because I think we kind of have a little bit of in common with our offense. Last year was kind of where like we had kind of a throw it up and go get it type of offense with Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. And I think that led to us really concentrating our targets to the top guys. And so this year I'm hoping that we can spread it out a little bit more. Like you said, with you guys' offense, I think it's a little bit deeper in its skill sets. And so I think that'll kind of open up the playbook a little bit. But yeah, man, I think it's funny that we kind of got the thicker quarterbacks in the state, but man, I think I'm excited for these 2 guys to be able to show their, and I think with DJ, and I'm not sure about KJ, but I mean, when you turn on this film, he's a little faster than you think. He's not quick. He's not like JT or like John Rice Plumlee, like for with you guys, maybe not that quick shift guy, but I mean, when they get moving, they can stride it out pretty good, being 6'4".
And having that big body, they can absorb contact, right? And so the yards after contact is a big thing with KJ Jefferson. He's known for shedding tacklers. And when you have someone that's 6'4", 240, 250, you can do that. I mean, look at the NFL on Sundays and what those tight ends are doing. They're around 6'5", 240, and they're shedding tacklers as well. The other thing, since you mentioned Miami, we have a former Miami player for us who's also 6'4", 220. That's Ja'Cory Brown, who joined us this year from Miami. He was supposed to be competing for their starting spot this year, but decided to join a winning team, and is now a UCF Knight. Daniel, how's the situation look up in Florida? Because we play you this year, and I'd like to come out of the swamp with a win.
Yeah, well, the situation, depending on who you talk to, is either questionable or looking up. We returned Graham Mertz, 6-year starter. Now, there have been lots of 6-year starters recently with the COVID year that have done well. Jaden Daniels last year at LSU, of course, being one of them. The question really is, does Graham Mertz get the help around him, and does the play calling improve? And I know some Gator fans won't want to talk about that side of things, but last year our O-line was bad, but then we're still running play action. For example, in I believe it was pistol, 70% of the time we're throwing the ball. Well, with a bad O-line, if you're running play action, that's longer. You're asking them to block. And Graham Mertz last year, career high 31 sacks, and he only played in 11 games or 10 and a half games. He went out late against Missouri, didn't play the FSU game. But as far as what's around him, we brought in Elijah Badger, and we brought in, of course, I'm going to forget the name, Kamir DK. DK played with Graham Mertz at Wisconsin. Elijah Badger comes over from Arizona State. He's got lots of speed. DK has that camaraderie and experience with Graham Mertz. Of course, we lost Ricky Pearsall, who went in the first round to the went to the San Francisco 49ers. However, we also bring back Eugene Wilson, who was a big time freshman for us at the receiver spot. And so he's going to be big. He had a quote recently that last year he was just out there playing on instinct for the most part. And this year he feels dangerous because he understands more of what the offense is asking him to do, and he knows more of his assignments. The big question is, what's our offensive line going to do? We returned Jake Slaughter, who last year, due to injury, was forced into the starting center role, actually ended up being one of the top offensive linemen for Florida. Now, with a year of experience under his belt, it's going to be a question, can the guys around him do well? Austin Barber at left tackle, currently, he's in a battle with Devin Manuel. He was a all-SEC true freshman 2 years ago at tackle, had a great year. Last year at left tackle, kind of left some things to be desired. Next to him is Kanaji Harris, who was a big-time recruit for Billy Napier. Question is he ready to go now that it's game time? Billy Napier doing what you could say the odd thing with 2 offensive line coaches, and that's something that does have to pay off this year because offensive line recruiting hasn't been knocking it out of the park quite in the same way that FSU's is. So if you're going to have 2 offensive line coaches, you've got to see the guys that they've brought in and developed perform by year 3. Of course, on the right side, Damian George moves from tackle, where he was not doing a great job last year, and they're hoping the move to guard will help out and help some of the problems that he had with speed rushers and others. And then at right tackle, we have a transfer that has come in from San Diego State, Brandon Crenshaw Dixon. Sorry, saying that name several times fast will get you. He's
it feels like that video clip of the guy saying all the names, the comedian saying all the names.
Yeah,
like Chick Clary.
Yeah, and I'm going to trip over it. And of course, a guy that Billy Napier also at tackle brought over from Louisiana when he came over, Cameron Waits, who's a nice big guy who you'd like to see at tackle. Unfortunately, he's been a little snake bitten due to injuries. So it'll be interesting to see what Florida's offensive line really does. Again, last year, not the best offensive line, gave up 31 sacks to Graham Mertz alone. Granted, sometimes did things like I talked about with the play action that didn't help them out. But receiver, I talked about the big 3, the 2 transfers, and Eugene Wilson, but you also have Khalil Jackson, who's a legacy, he's a solid guy. He doesn't do anything that's, going to wow you, but he's going to make a catch every now and again that really stands out, and he's solid, but he's not going to be a guy, or at least from what we've seen, he's not blowing past people. He's not going to out juke people, but he's going to be a solid backup. And then we also have three 4-star guys that came in last season, mostly did not play in Aiden Mazzell, Andy Jean, and then Eugene Wilson, who did play. We also have Marcus Burke, who's been with the program 4 years. And after 3 years in Billy's system, now's the time to produce. So we feel like we have depth. Running back, Montrell Johnson returns. He did recently injure his knee, so there's questions on whether he'll be ready for the kickoff on the 31st against the Hurricanes, or whether he won't be back until closer to that A&M or Mississippi State game in weeks 3 or 4. Something to keep an eye on, because behind him, there's not a lot of experience as far as Gator experience, because his backup is Treon Webb, who last year was our third running back. Unfortunately, we lost Trevor Etienne going to Georgia, which a lot of people saw. If you're going to transfer, don't transfer to your main rival. But hey, he did what he did. Now we just have to live with it. Treon Webb is another legacy that the Gators have. Hopefully he can step up. He looked okay, didn't look like a home run threat, but that could just be the limited time he was in. We did in the spring game see Jordan Baugh, who is a true freshman, came in 3-star guy, kind of under the radar, but that guy showed explosiveness. He showed he could make guys miss, and also the ability to lower the shoulder and lay the boom. So I'm very excited to see what he has coming up. We also have a guy in Cam Carroll who transferred last year from Tulane. Unfortunately, blew out his knee, so we don't know his availability. But there's talent there. The question is, will Billy Napier in year 3 of his play calling, put this talent together? This is
I was going to ask you that, Daniel. Like, everything in UCF land has been, when Billy Napier was hired, there was a lot of questions when it came to UCF fans and, his history. And there were some recruiting issues with him when he was in Louisiana. And, a lot of UCF fans are and I'll be blatant here, are looking as the game in the swamp as being an opportunity to fire Billy Napier, for the Gators, because I think I don't think everybody in Gatorland is happy, and I'm not talking about the one in Bithlo in Orlando, is happy with Billy Napier either, and the thought is he's on the hot seat. So as an offensive mind, recruiting aside, what kind of confidence level do you have in his ability to coordinate an offense in a way that's going to be effective in either the SEC or just in general?
That's actually part of the trick for the year. I'll be honest, Billy Napier himself has never called a top 40 passing offense. Last year, he did come close before Graham Mertz got injured. Granted, there's times like the Utah game where we're down by 3 scores and put up 200 yards, for example, after we're down by 3 scores. So some things were kind of hidden and things like that. However, Russ Callaway, who was our tight ends coach 2018, Samford, #1 passing offense, if not the #1 offense in the FCS, goes into Florida State, leads Florida State in Doak Campbell Stadium into the 4th quarter. And this year got promoted to a co-OC role. Currently, there are rumors, and who knows, by the time this airs, maybe it's announced that he's actually going to be calling plays. Last year, he got involved in the Gators' red zone offense and also assisting with some of the offense coordinating. In 2022, the Gators were in the 70s in red zone scoring percentage. Last year ended up in the top 20 with Russ Callaway. So I say right now, a guy who's an air raid guy who has lots of experience. I think a lot of it hinges on letting Russ Callaway kind of become almost like a Joe Brady at LSU, where Joe Brady came in and was passing game coordinator, where Billy does call a pretty good running game. But if you don't have a threat in the passing game, or you're averaging, again, I think I said, if not, when we were 3 wide last year, our average depth of target was 3.8 yards. And if you're doing that, the play action, again, going back to 70%, no one's going to respect it because you're not going over their heads.
Just load
they're
the
just
box
going
against that.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's why I think if Russ Callaway's coming in, or if he's going to have more of a hand, as we've heard, and we've had players, and I've talked to players who have said, yeah, he's really, really creative. I'm quite excited. I do think a lot of that's being played close to the vest right now. So for Florida, there are two things. They can either look at how it's been middling and been in like the 40s, 50s, 60s in scoring last year and other categories, or you can look at it as, hey, maybe we've got this guy who can come in and take Billy Napier's decent running game, but with the complement of a great passing game, and possibly get to a place where UCF and FSU have been offensively. And that's been, top 25 offenses, for a few years now, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the comparison that you use with the Joe Brady, because I mean, sometimes, you have a guy who can coordinate a good run game, but you need that pass game to match up to make them open things up in the run. Now, my question with Florida is, if you look at that kind of air raid style offense coming in, do you think Graham Mertz is the guy who can lead that type of offense? And I was going to ask you about, I noticed last year when I was kind of looking up some numbers on Mertz, and to be honest, I had to eat a little bit of crow. I think Mertz is a better quarterback than I thought he would be, coming in from Wisconsin, where they just kind of hand the ball off a lot. I think he's an efficient guy. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Maybe not one of those guys who's going to air it out, but he's efficient. And sometimes that's all you need. But it looks like around 64% of the passes were for 10 yards or less. So again, like you said, if you don't have that deep threat, teams don't really have to respect that, and they can load the box, which makes it hard to run. And, again, that first game, you might be without your horse at running back in ETN or Montel Johnson. So do you think that the offense gets more of a downfield threat this year with Graham Mertz still at quarterback? Or do you think that's maybe a limitation that he has that, and I'm not going to predict this throughout you guys' season because it means things have went bad, but do you think that is something that potentially Lagway would open up, that more downfield shot? Because it seems like, again, with Mertz, he's a very efficient, good quarterback, just doesn't get the ball down the field. And I'm wondering if Florida's going to be able to stretch the field this year.
Right. And last year during the Kentucky game, of course, we're being blown out. I get a text message and it says, I feel bad for Graham Mertz. He's stuck in the system, which before the season, a lot of people are like, oh, because of Graham Mertz at Wisconsin, they're like, oh no, we got this guy. He's not going to be great. And he ended up being, like you said, really efficient, sometimes pretty good, sometimes not so good. But I mean, 20 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, I believe was the stat line. And, that you'll take that all day. But like you said, it's not too far down the field. Some of that I do think was the design of the offense and not so much Graham Mertz. And that's what I'm banking on with Russ Callaway, but also bringing in guys like Elijah Badger, who's supposed to be a burner. And then also with Eugene Wilson, saying last year he wasn't quite sure everything is doing, but this year he knows. So I'm thinking we'll see more of that. And then also if you have more, one thing I've called on for my show is more 0-1 step drop pass plays where you're going to back the defense off. You're not throwing it, 15 yards downfield, but then at least if you create that defense where they don't just
get it out quick.
Yeah, you get it out quick, which I think Russ Callaway can do. That's going to open up, and it sounds weird, but it's going to open up that deep game, and we'll see what he does. As far as DJ Lagway, I've said to some people, it kind of reminds me of a Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence type situation, or a Jalen Hurts and Tua. Now, as I said to someone last night, yeah, Kelly Bryant and Tua took their teams to national title games before they ended up getting benched for the younger guy. But it's one of these, if you're not performing and things aren't moving as well as they should, you're definitely probably going to see the younger guy if you feel he's ready. Although Billy Napier, very, very loyal guy. For example, he's gotten rid of some staff members. He's never fired a staff member that came with him from Louisiana. So I just don't know how much that loyalty will take place. The one guy who he moved out of position, which was our strength coach, Mark Hawk, he's gotten moved out of that position. He still has a job in the building. So that tells me chances are a QB move, unless we're having a losing season, are probably not going to happen, but we'll see. But I think Graham Mertz has a potential to hit that deep threat a lot more this season, to answer your question more directly.
Yeah, it's a couple of things. I mean, everybody knows and that most games are won in the trenches, right? So for me, for Florida's performance this year, it's going to be really heavily predicated on that O line. I know for us, like when you guys face us, our D line is pretty stacked, especially inside. We have John Walker, we have Lee Hunter, and then we've got another guy that's coming back that was out last year that came from FCS but did really well. And so that interior D line is going to be pretty stacked, and the edges. We had the number one rushing defensive end last year in the Big 12. He's moved on, but the guys that have taken his place are, younger but better than what he was. So it'll be really, really interesting to see how that offensive line holds up, because doesn't matter, what you do. If your offensive line is not going to hold up, and you play all three Florida schools, so you have the opportunity to be the king of the state of Florida this year. Not saying that you will. Chances are you won't. But you do have that opportunity. But I think a lot of that goes with the offensive line.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, man, I agree. I was about to say, as a Florida State fan, trust me, we can tell you all about offensive line struggles and how it will just absolutely crash your program. I mean, you look back to like the Dalvin Cook years where, I mean, he just was one of the best players, running backs in college football history, running behind a trash offensive line. And now you've seen that progression. And that's one thing that I'm watching with this year. And, we actually have a Florida transfer in Richie Leonard that we're hoping can be a guy for us. So hearing you talk about the offensive line struggles last year isn't the most encouraging. Which I know the Princely kid that transferred out said that Richie Leonard was your best offensive line, but he said a lot of things after he transferred out. I think there were some sour grapes there.
But Jesse, let's be real. You're playing in the ACC, bro. How many really good defensive lines do you have in the ACC? I mean, seriously.
I mean, when you look at Miami has a pretty loaded defensive line, as much as we don't want to give them credit. Clemson is another team that has consistently produced NFL defensive linemen. Really, I think outside of that, there's not a ton of really strong defensive line that's about
two.
to do. And then, I mean, you have like us who's in there as well. But other than that, I mean, we don't play Virginia Tech this year. I know they had an all-ACC guy from Louisville, their defensive end that made all-ACC team. So I think it's like you have good defensive linemen in the ACC, but good defensive lines as a whole are a little bit few and far between. But I do think the ACC defensive lines, there's a few of them in there that are pretty respectable. And that's why, I mean, when you look at some of the ones that we played last year, last year actually was Florida State, or Mike Norvell as a offensive coordinator or head coach, was actually his lowest per game rushing total throughout his career. And so we have to get better at running the ball. We ran for about 150 yards last year. He's a guy that typically puts up about 180 to 200 yards a game. And you can tell that last year, like, we only ran the ball 20 times against Clemson because he kind of abandoned it. He knew we couldn't move the ball. We were held under 100 yards against 3 of the 4 top 25 rushing offenses that we face. So we have to get better. We bring in an Alabama offensive line transfer, a Florida offensive line transfer. Last year, we brought in a guy from Auburn. And I think that's really the difference of where you're seeing with our offensive line now is we're not bringing in guys from Charlotte and Lamar, who, by all means, they did a serviceable job for us. We're starting to bring in Power 5 transfers now. And I think it's where, like, you look at a guy like Julian Armella, a guy who's been a hot name at Florida State when he committed. This is the guy that probably would have started as a true freshman 3, 4, 5 years ago. Now it's year 3, and he's not even really projected in that too deep. So I think the depth and stuff will be a big part of what we do this year, because we're going to have to run the ball to help DJU out. And I think DJ will, talking about the depth, I think he will open up that deep pass game. And that's something that we're looking to kind of explore this year, because, Jordan was really good, but he really kind of struggled a little bit with the deep ball. And so that's what I'm hoping DJ brings back this year. But I think a lot of that's going to be predicated on the run game. And I mean, like you just said, man, it all starts up front with the offensive line. So if you have a bad offensive line, now I will give them credit. They have pass blocked well. They were top 20 in offensive line pass blocking efficiency last year. So they've been good at pass blocking. But, you talk about the play action. DJU performed better in play action at Oregon State. But you can't. Play action only works if you can run the ball. So we have to be able to run the ball this year against the better teams that we play. And I mean, again, putting up over 200 yards would be massive for offense. And I know that's something that UCF did last year.
Yeah, 228 yards per game for us last year. And you know, as much as we were touted for rushing last year, we put up 487 per game for the season. You know, we were actually fairly balanced. Our passing yards, JRP was much maligned for his passing ability, but he averaged 258.8 per game himself. So, you know, when you have a balanced offense that gives you options, I do think we're going to lean more heavily on passing the ball this year, with the running game being as strong as it possibly can be, and really trying to wear people down. The Big 12, and I think UCF even last year was a little bit different than the year before, because we did a lot of sweeps, we did a lot of outside running, and then you know, we ran between the tackles, but not as much as you would think. Last year we ran between the tackles. This year it's going to be inside zone read, or inside zone running in the A gap. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see how that works out. But I think we have a quarterback that can do what JRP couldn't. He might get one read, two, like the first year it was one read and run. The second year it was, okay, I'll get 2 or 3 reads in, but his confidence, he wasn't quite confident enough to get the ball out in space fast enough, because he had to wait for everything to develop, and then he tucked and ran. I think the thing that's dynamic about KJ Jefferson is he has the ability to climb the pocket, move around in the pocket, keep his eyes downfield, and then run if he has to. So I think we're going to lean on the passing game a little bit more this year than we have in years past. So it'll be super interesting to see how it works out.
Yeah, I think something that will contribute to that is Jefferson, although he can run, he's very much a pass first guy, where he doesn't quite have the running ability. And I don't mean this as a diss, but the running ability of a John Reese Plumlee, who had, I think, a little better top speed and maybe a little bit more shiftiness, where when Jefferson runs, like you talked about earlier, he's got the, you could say, power of it being as big as he is.
He's looking downfield, and he's also a guy that will shed tacklers and defenders in the pocket if he has to. Like John Rice Plumlee wasn't doing that. He would out. He is shifty, right? And you know, he's a converted wide receiver. I mean, that's what he was. And he was a quarterback. Played quarterback in high school. Did play when he was in Mississippi. I think he was in Mississippi State. He did play there, and then or Ole Miss, I can't remember which one it was. Ole Miss, yeah. And then he went and played receiver, did well there. He had the speed, he had the shiftiness, but when you're looking at a smaller guy, he's built more like a running back than he's built like a quarterback. So he used that to his advantage, and it was a good thing. And you know, but I think, you know, everybody always says this every year, Gus. You know, you talk about Gus and Cam Newton and what he did with Cam Newton. This is, at UCF so far, the guy that he's had the closest to what Cam Newton was physically, and the ability to shed tackles like Cam Newton did when he played underneath him. I don't expect him to be Cam Newton, but he is still Arkansas's highest leading passer ever at Arkansas. And also, last year had a terrible offensive line. I mean, atrocious. We were talking about offensive lines. Arkansas had an atrocious offensive line. I don't know if you guys played them last year, Daniel, but they were really, really bad.
That's the game people jumped off the train. The people that are off the Napier train already, that's the game. Losing at home to a team that just fired their offensive coordinator. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Because KJ was talking about looking forward to playing in the Swamp again. And there's a little bit of a conversation going there as he was able to win with Arkansas, you know, coming back and having that experience of playing in the Swamp and winning there. That would be interesting if we won again and they ended up firing Billy, because it was like, if the hot seat starts with KJ at Arkansas and finishes with KJ at UCF, that would be an interesting storyline.
There are some who have, I'd say the general sentiment is you can't lose that game on October 5th to UCF, not coming off of a bye week and not at home. So we will see how it goes. I won't be predicting that you guys get Napier fired, but I will say if you somehow pull it off, it'll definitely ramp up the seat. That's for sure. Even for those that have the seat cold as ice right now.
Well, I will say this: just make sure you beat Miami first before we play our game. That's all I care about.
Yes, I mean for sure. So
we can be transitive state champions if I don't care. You know what I mean? we were transitive national champions. We can be transitive state champions for all I care.
I hope you guys take Miami down in that first one. I mean, I will say, I think it's going to be tough if you don't have Montrell Johnson. I think, obviously the home field advantage does help, but yeah, man, I mean, that's, the thing with Napier is like, I think if he can make a bowl this year, I think it probably saves his job. But I think there's a few in there where if things start to go south, that could lead to maybe looking at making a change. But, I think they, I do think we're talking about Miami. We'll spend just a couple minutes. As we get a little later in the show, we'll talk a little bit about the Miami offense. We'll throw them in there too. None of us cover Miami, so we won't go super in depth, but just to throw them into the conversation. The funny thing is, I think when you look at them, they bring in a new quarterback, obviously the hottest probably name in one of the hottest names in college football with Cam Ward. I really think the question for Miami this year is with the new quarterback, did they this offseason work on installing that victory formation? Is that something Cam Ward can do? Can he take that knee to win a game? Because sometimes it's just the simple plays that you need in your playbook. But, I think it's going to be interesting to see, man, because you have, like, to me, this is a put up or shut up year for Miami, really, when you look at it's year 3 for Cristobal. They have the talent to win the ACC at a minimum, which gets you into the playoffs. They had the quarterback that they wanted in Cam Ward. And you have a guy who came from an air raid system out west, and now he's with a Shannon Dawson, who is an air raid guy in his past as an offensive coordinator. But there's times where, like, Mario Cristobal has always kind of been criticized for getting his hands in the offense. And, as a former offensive line coach, he likes to run the ball. And even when you look at when they had Justin Herbert at Oregon, I mean, they only threw the ball 46% of the time in 2018. So, and then 35% of the time in 2017. So it's going to be interesting. He told me at ACC Media Days that they do plan on kind of letting him throw the ball heavily. And I mean, when you got some of the receivers with Restrepo and Jacoby George, they got a talented offensive line. They got a really good running back that came from Oregon State and Damian Martinez. I think they have the potential to have a really good offense. I just think, for me, one, I don't trust the coaching there from that offense. And then also, I think there's a little bit of overhyped to Cam Ward. I mean, obviously, he's a dynamic athlete. He can make plays with his arm. He can make plays with his legs. But I just think he's put up really, really incredible numbers. But he's also thrown the ball over 500 times or around 500 times the last 2 seasons at Washington State. And it's been primarily against a lot of bad defenses. So, you come to the ACC. I know the ACC doesn't have a ton of great defenses, but when you look at Florida State, Clemson, and I think Virginia Tech's getting a little bit better, they have a couple of games that, maybe they could, we'll see. We'll see if they can produce at the same level, but I'm just not sure, man.
So
it's the coaching there that I don't trust.
So, Jesse, are you saying he was throwing darts?
I mean, man, he's decent. You know what I mean? I don't want to I don't want to diss the kid. You know what I mean? I don't want to diss him. I think you missed the joke. What I was referencing is that Twitter thing that came out yesterday where I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but they basically Colorado stitched together a pass on their highlight reel where he was throwing it and they were showing it as a touchdown. It wasn't. So now it's become a thing where all these different schools have done this, and it's kind of gone viral.
Funny enough,
I think we did. I didn't see the joke, but I think we actually did something like that yesterday because I was like, "Well, that was a weird highlight."
Funny enough, though, you brought up Princely, who left Florida, went to Ole Miss. He put out, or he quoted someone today that showed that actually from that end zone angle, and it was showing, and it was actually the same play. Just a really terrible edit, but it was actually the same play. The throw and the catch were the same. As hilarious.
Oh, it doesn't matter if it was or not. It's already Katie barred the door, right? I mean, like I told our head of our social media team, I messaged him yesterday. I said, we totally need to have dartboards in the student section now when Colorado comes. And he thought it was hilarious. So knowing UCF, that might actually happen.
So just like an FSU trip to Omaha, we got to get out of here pretty soon. I had
1-2 and barbecue, baby. That's
Omaha,
Yeah.
Omaha.
but anyways, let's go ahead, Jesse. If you could rank the 4 Power 4 QBs in the state, what would your ranking be?
Man, it this hurts my heart to say it, but I think just from a quarterback perspective, I think you have to look at a couple things here, right? When you go into ranking a quarterback, because it's not just to say who's the best. I think that DJU is going to be at Florida State. Florida State is going to be more reliant on their run game than they are DJU. We talked about this in our quarterback preview where I don't think DJ needs to have a Heisman type of season for Florida State to be good. I think Cam Ward needs to have a Heisman type of season for Miami to be good. Which, I mean, they have other pieces around him, but, that's you saw what Luke Fickell came out and threw Mario Cristobal right under the bus, which was a surprise why Cam Ward went there to up his draft stock, where he's like, look, they ruined Tyler Van Dyke. And so, we'll see how that turns out with that quarterback situation. But I think you'll see Cam Ward throw the ball more than DJU. I think obviously KJ Jefferson is a guy that can be big on running and passing at UCF. And I think Graham Mertz, you just have to understand that, like, when you say better, I think he'll probably be the most efficient, right? Florida kind of seems to have that offense where it's like, get the ball to your playmakers in space and let them make the plays, not necessarily Graham Mertz make the plays. And so I think from if you're talking about raw, like who's going to dominate the stat sheet, I would probably give that to Cam Ward. Now, if you want the win-loss total stat sheet, I don't think it's going to be Miami, but I think that Cam Ward will probably be the most productive quarterback in the state. And then I think that DJ is going to be – man, I think DJ is going to have a much better year than people think. I really do. I know the accuracy issues and the inconsistencies has always been an issue, but I think when you look at what Mike Norvell can do with them, I think he is going to be one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the state. I also think you have to consider the defenses they have to play. I think KJ Jefferson is certainly going to be pushing them. Unfortunately, I'm going to put Mertz kind of down low on the list a little bit. But I think you have to look at the style of game that is. I think he's going to be, if you want to compare completion percentage, he'll dominate DJU. I guarantee you that.
Yeah.
But, if you want to look at like maybe downfield passing or something, they're all going to be better in their own right. So I hate to put Cam Ward up top, man, but I think like if he's not the number 1 quarterback in the state this year, it's going to be a probably bad year for Miami.
Yeah, so I'm going to look at it a little bit differently. I'm just going to look at the quarterbacks themselves, right, and look at them in a vacuum. Who's the best quarterback in the state? I would agree, Cam Ward. We were actually heavily recruiting him too, and we're in it when with Miami. They just threw a bigger bag at the time. So I think Cam Ward is number 1 for that reason. I don't know how productive he's going to be in Miami. I think they're going to lean on him. KJ Jefferson's also going to be featured. Gus wants to win now. He knows he needs to win now. And continue the recruiting momentum that we've had. We've got plenty of opportunities to do that. Last year was a disappointing season, first season that he'd ever had a losing season. Now the regular season, it was 6-6, but he lost the bowl game. He was very angry. I interacted with him quite a bit in the off season. I also saw him in the pressers this year. He had his wife, Christy Malzahn, had a health scare, a legitimate health scare. So he kind of stepped back. Now he's taking the reins back. And he saw that as a personal affront because it's the first time in his entire career, whether it be high school, college, all the levels of college that he took a step back. So I feel like he is going to feature KJ Jefferson. They all know there's going to be a lot riding on it. And I think KJ, he went from a dark horse Heisman candidate and to last year because of injuries and everything that was going on with the O-line. So I feel like KJ is going to come back out guns a-blazing. He has something to prove because he's getting ready for the NFL next year. And, barring any kind of injury, I would put him just from raw talent, how I saw him play at Arkansas. I was talking about KJ Jefferson actually 2 years ago because I saw him play a game in Arkansas, and just watching him play, he's a very, very talented QB. So I would put him at number 2. I would say DJ number 3, and I agree on Graham Mertz. He's the guy that if you plug him into a system, I think he can be efficient. it's going to be a question for Mertz as to what the pieces are around him and if he's running for his life the entire season. Yeah. So that's kind of how I would stack them. Daniel, what do you think?
Well, I'm probably going to put KJ at number one, because I don't want to put a Hurricane up there, but two, KJ, for what he had around him and for the people he was playing in the SEC on, last year, probably the second worst team in the SEC besides Vanderbilt, only one SEC win. Yes. But anyways, for what he had around him, he did really well. So I'm going to give him that little bit of, edge of what he had based with competition and give him that edge over Cam Ward. Although Cam Ward can show me more this year. Cam Ward, I'd probably have at number 2 because everywhere he's been, he has been productive. I mean, the dude last 3 years has averaged like 3,700 yards a season. How much of that was competition? How much of that was certain offenses? We'll see this year. I'm going to be a homer here probably and put Mertz in efficiency. And I think that this year, if we see more Callaway, we're going to see more production out of Mertz and more of that downfield and whatnot. And DJU, he's done some good things, but he also hasn't been great. So I would say I am giving the homer nod to Mertz. I think they're very similar quarterbacks where they both can be efficient, but I'm going to go with this year with the talent around them and where FSU's replacing a lot. And I'm not saying it's not quality replacements, but you're replacing a lot where there's a lot more. Even one of our transfers in is a guy who played receiver with him at Wisconsin that he's familiar with. So I'm going to go with Mertz at 3, DJU at 4, and I admit my bias, so I won't pretend there wasn't some of that. But hey, it'll people do.
It'll be interesting because Florida plays some good defenses this year and plays both of us and plays Miami, so you'll have the opportunity to put that through to the test as well, throughout the season. So I think we'll actually have more so than most years, we'll have an accurate way of or litmus test of seeing which quarterback performs better, within the state and who's top dog.
Yeah, no, and I don't blame you for putting DJ there because for me, I've always said with DJ is like I think he's a guy that his floor and it's not super low, but his ceiling is really high. I mean, this was a guy coming out of high school that was rated above in the 2020 class, above CJ Stroud and above Carson Beck. He's just never hit his potential, his ceiling. And it's like, our question is, can Mike Norvell get that out of him? Because Mike Norvell, actually, interesting stat, DJU has never thrown for over 3,000 yards in the season. Mike Norvell has never had a quarterback that started the entire season throw for less than 3,000 yards. So something has to give. But I think the thing with DJ is, our biggest question mark right now is wide receiver. And are those guys going to be able to step up around him? If you gave DJ the receivers that we had last year, I could probably see putting him at the top of the list. But, until I see it on the field, I'm really excited about Malik Benson. I think Hakeem Williams can be that guy. I think we have a couple slot guys that I really like. But, Portier and Darian Williamson are two guys that have to step up that have never even been able to stay healthy. So, I think for DJU to be successful, I think the pieces around him really have to step up. And that's something that I am a little bit concerned about.
Just as an aside real quick, since you mentioned Norvell, for those that don't know, Gus Malzahn and Mike Norvell were on the Tulsa staff together in their prolific offenses during that time frame, which we actually played in the AAC championship game. So, check out his pictures from that time frame if you haven't. The braids were braids. So we'll just leave it at that.
Cornrow Mike, yeah, heck yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely enjoyed watching Paul Smith do ridiculous things that year with Tulsa. But with that said, I think it's time to get out of here. Hopefully, our fans aren't disappointed. Like anyone expecting attendance at a Hurricanes game, you know how it is. But I think it's been a good first episode. Is there anything either of you have to say to our listeners before we go ahead and run?
No, I would just say that, guys. I mean, obviously, both of you know, Miami fans. I know you're gonna find the comments. I know you guys know how big and important that Florida, college football is in the state of Florida, and that's why we're jumping out on this venture to kind of really bring you guys football from the heart of Florida, covering the Power Four programs. And you know, it's our first episode. We're still finding our traction, but we're gonna make sure to stay with it for you guys, constantly improving and constantly bringing you that Florida content that I know you're looking for. Because let's face it, I mean, there's college football as a whole in the nation, and there's college football in the state of Florida, and it's kind of its own animal. And so I think that there's a big excitement that we're going to be able to bring you guys, and we're going to have some great content coming up. So definitely like and subscribe and stay tuned for more.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, one of the things that you should expect is a few more. I know we threw a few jabs at each other, but a few more of those coming. This episode was real stats heavy because we're prepping for the season.
Right.
But you know, the goal with this is to have a little fun with it, and to Jesse's point, bring you the state of Florida in a way that's both entertaining and insightful. So I think we've got with Daniel and Jesse both bring a lot to the table from that perspective, and I hope I do the same. And we're excited to do this, the true big three in the state of Florida, not just by license plate sales, but you know, super excited to be part of this and bring you college football.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and check us out next time on Fourth and Florida.